Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, a podcast that aims to address divorce, separation and co-parenting here in the UK, countering the often sensationalist way it's portrayed in the media, challenging the status quo and driving for reform. On each episode, I'm joined by experts to discuss divorce, separation and co-parenting from different angles and to give their opinions and to debate them. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor and divorce coach, co-founder of Amicable, the divorce services company, and host of the Divorce Podcast. In this episode, I was joined by Clare Reilly from PensionBee and Anna Dunne from Amicable. Clare is the Chief Engagement Officer at PensionBee, a leading online pension provider. Anna oversees the drafting of consent orders at Amicable and has worked in family law for over 16 years, 11 of which as a family law solicitor. I began by asking Clare to briefly explain the various types of pension available and the differences between them. We then explored the typical issues that might arise during a divorce in terms of pensions, and I asked Anna to run through the various ways that pensions can be dealt with in a divorce, such as offsetting, pension sharing, or less commonly through pension attachment orders. We reviewed how overseas pensions adds further complexity when it comes to divorce proceedings, and that overseas pensions can be really tricky to value and to split. We also discussed the decisions that you need to make when dealing with a pension award in your divorce and the fees that are involved in pension sharing. This episode should give you an outline of all of the issues you need to consider when dealing with pensions as part of your divorce. If you really loved this episode or want to hear more episodes like this, then please make sure to rate us on your preferred listening platform. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to you both.
Hi there.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you. Thanks very much for joining me. I hope this is going to be a really informative tour of what pensions mean and then talking about pensions on divorce as well. So I'm really interested to get some of the basic information out there and then to debate a bit further some of the subtleties around pensions and divorce. So I'm looking forward to this. And I think kind of pensions is one of those things that you merrily contribute to them for a while. And then all of a sudden, if a divorce or something like that happens, you're suddenly having to confront and face what your pension looks like. And it can be quite tricky for people to really get a handle on some of, the values and the costs and the different options for sharing a pension on divorce. So maybe Clare, let's start right at the very beginning with some real basic information. What types of pension are there?
So there are two types of pension. There's obviously a state pension, and then there are private pensions as well. And within private pensions, you have defined contribution pensions and you have defined benefit pensions. So defined contribution pensions are the most common type of pension that you see today. They're the type that we offer at PensionBee, and they're the type your employer will give you if you don't work in the public sector. So they're pretty straightforward to understand. They're usually a mix of investments or assets that have a live value that you can see at any time in a pot. So you and your employer make defined or set contributions over your lifetime to build your pension fund, and then those investments grow over time so that in retirement you have a pot of money to support you as you need. You're very much responsible for this pot, so you're responsible for growing it and you're responsible for how you spend it when you reach retirement. That is very different from a defined benefit pension, which is the other type of pension. Now, they are historically the old type of workplace pensions that pay you a set income for life when you retire. So that's the defined benefit bit. So they're very valuable and they're pretty rare now in the private sector, but they're still common in the public sector. So if you're in the police, the army, you're a doctor, teacher, nurse, or another type of civil servant, you'll have one of those. And with defined benefit pensions, your employer is responsible for paying you that set amount each month in retirement until you die, which of course with increases in life expectancy can now be 30 or 40 years, hence why they are so valuable.
Right, okay. So there's two basic types of pension, and we'll come on to how that works in terms of splitting and divorce. But for now, you mentioned PensionBee, and what does PensionBee do then with pensions? Just tell me a little bit about that.
So we exist to help people combine all of their old pensions from periods of previous employment into one new plan. It's a special feature of the UK system that every time you start a new job in the UK, you will get a new pot, and that pot will be with a provider of your employer's choice. So the average number of jobs that someone has in the UK now is about 11. So you will potentially end up with 11 of these. because of every new job you've had. And so we exist to help you combine all those pensions together. And we have an online service so you can manage that pension online, make contributions, withdrawals, and do everything you need to do to feel in control of having one pot in one place. And so that's us. Our customers are 18 to 80, based all over the UK, and they normally sign up to our service with around 2 to 3 pots. But we have seen customers sign up with many, many more.
Right. And do people typically get in touch around a divorce, or do they tend to do it after their divorce? So tell me a little bit about the typical issues you see when somebody's divorcing and they have pensions.
I mean, to be honest, the most common issue with pensions and divorce is that pensions get forgotten about in divorce proceedings. Pensions are often very confusing. And, most people in the UK might not know their own balance, their own pension balance, let alone the balance of their spouse or whether their spouse has one. And of course, that issue is really one-sided because men tend to have much larger pensions than women. The average gender pensions gap in the UK is about 38%. And so that means men's pensions are about 38% larger. And then when you get into older age, that problem gets a lot worse because of the compounding effect of men having worked more hours and with higher wages for those hours, whereas women are taking more time out the labour force to do unpaid work or to work part-time. And so you see in for people in their 50s and 60s, men's pensions can be about 100k more than women's. And so obviously pensions are very important, but obviously what we see really is that they're often not necessarily included in divorce. I tried to look up some data on this and I found data only from 2019, unfortunately, but it said in family court data from 2019, only 12% of divorces had some type of pension division. So I'm hoping that's gone up now, but in 2019, it looked like it was 12%. So that's kind of the background to it. But
that's very low. Yeah,
it's very low indeed. And I think, despite those differences, and obviously people focus on the family home and they focus on custody of the children, but pensions are a really important joint asset and they've often been built up due to in home and, the free labour of women. And therefore, they should be considered a joint primary asset in divorce proceedings. But also where we do see pensions and divorce at PensionBee, there's three observations really. I mean, just general confusion about the process on both sides. So we see people don't understand how the process works at all. So we need 3 documents to begin this process. We need the decree absolute, we need the consent order, and we need the pension sharing order or annex that's outlining how to divide the pension. So we need all those documents in full. We need them to be certified and we need amendments to be certified. But to begin, we see just real confusion around the documents that are needed. So customers don't have all of them. There's a lot of back and forth, sometimes between us and other providers, because where there are multiple pensions being split, it can be kind of very confusing and overwhelming for people to kind of navigate all of this paperwork and know what is required from the provider. And so that's kind of the first obstacle to overcome, is actually getting all the paperwork in place and having all the pages of the paperwork. And so customers that's the first kind of confusion around how the process works. And then I think the other thing we see as well, which is quite important, is that often because of the technical complexity of pensions, for many people, the divorce might be the first time that they've had they're going to have a pension. And so, if one partner has been working full time and had the pension, it might be that their partner took time out of the workforce and brought up children, so didn't necessarily have a pension. And so, it's only at the point of divorce that they're going to need to learn everything about pensions very, very quickly, because they're going to need to make a decision about which provider they're going to choose, right? There's so many different providers. Some of those providers have 3,000 different options. What's normal to pay in fees? Where should I invest the money? You need to basically grapple with all of that very, very quickly to decide where you want to take your portion of the pension settlement. And, there's already, so much, anxiety already around the process. And it's quite intimidating, I think, really, for a lot of people, that they have to grapple with all that very, very quickly and don't necessarily have any technical understanding of how pensions work at all.
Sure. I'm just going to bring Anna in. Anna, we often have situations, don't we, where we're looking at an asset spreadsheet, and it's very common that people think pensions are personal rather than marital assets. And that was something Claire just touched on. Just tell us what the law says about pensions and in terms of pension sharing and entitlements.
So pensions, I completely agree with you. They historically have often been ignored in financial settlements, which is a huge oversight and has massive financial implications for people. And I think you're right, family home is very tangible. People know that that's a family asset that needs to be shared, but pensions are sort of this thing in the distance that they're going to get at some point. But absolutely, they are just as an important asset as the family home savings, and they really need to be looked at carefully.
Yeah, and I think as well, people do often, because as Claire says, sometimes people aren't even conscious of how much value is in the pension. You get pension statements and perhaps you just shove them in the back of the drawer. Like maybe that's just what I do. But I think until you actually realise and understand that actually in some cases it's the biggest asset, and in other cases it's definitely the second biggest asset, isn't it? And therefore it has to be looked at. And it has to be very often shared.
Yes, absolutely. There are several ways in which you can deal with pensions when you divorce. So one of them is that no action is taken. And that may be appropriate in some circumstances where it's a very short marriage, a young couple. Perhaps they've both got very similar pension assets. But the big caveat to that is that you've just got to have the knowledge there. You need to know the value of the pensions involved. And as part of the divorce process, you'll get a cash equivalent value of that pension. But again, knowledge is power. It's knowing that a CEV of a defined contribution pension may not be comparable to somebody with a public sector pension, a defined benefit pension.
Right. So when we're looking at pension in divorce, you're right. We're trying to get a value, aren't we, of each pension. But I think what you're saying is that sometimes we're not comparing apples with apples. So just expand a little bit on that. So why is there sometimes a difference, and what is the difference between a CETV for a private pension versus a public sector pension?
So you're required to get a CEV, that's a cash equivalent value or transfer value, when you divorce. It's something you have to actually put down on the court form.
Can I just clarify that, Anna? Even if you're not going to split the pension, you have to get the CEV or the CETV, yeah?
Absolutely. And the reason for that is that it enables you both to make informed decisions. It's very easy to think, we'll just keep our own pensions, but you don't know if that's fair unless you have an idea of what your spouse's pension is worth. So the CEV it's a valuation of the benefits which have been accrued to date in that pension. So it doesn't include a future projection of income, a valuation of the death benefits or any discretionary benefits. Now, it's sort of the first protocol in getting your CEV. And it might be that is sufficient to tell you the value of the pension. But as we said, you've got to think about the type of pension involved. So a DB pension, defined benefit pension, the CEV alone may not tell you quite how valuable that pension is. It may £100,000 valuation of a defined contributions pension is not going to be comparable to one for a defined benefit pension.
So the CEV will understate a defined benefit pension potentially. So it will
yes.
will probably be more valuable than what it looks like on paper. So you were talking about the different ways of splitting pensions. So you can just agree to keep your own. You can use the CEV to say, look, they're comparable. And let's say for the sake of argument, they're both defined contribution pensions. So we are comparing apples with apples. And the court would be happy if you decided to split pensions in that way or to just maintain the pension. What happens if there's a big difference in pensions? What are the options then?
Mm-hmm. So an option to give real thought to is seeking a pension sharing order from the court. Now that is the order which Claire was referring to earlier, and that's where the court can require a percentage of one person's pension, or more, or you can do it for 2 pensions or 3 pensions, but a percentage will be transferred out of that pension fund. That's called a pension debit, and it'll be paid straight into a separate pension account held in their ex-spouse's name, and they get a pension credit. So they have a new pension fund created, or sometimes they might pay it into an existing pension that they have. It could be with a different provider to their spouse's original pension, or it could be with the same provider. Sometimes you don't get a choice. So if, say, it's an NHS pension or a teacher's pension, these are unfunded public sector pensions, then your pension credit will be put into a pension account with the same provider. So you'll get your new NHS pension.
Okay. So even if you don't work in the NHS, you could end up with an NHS pension because your spouse has an NHS pension.
That's right.
Okay. And Claire, you were saying earlier that you need to have certain documents to make sure that you can do and make those transfers, just remind us what those documents are. So if people are going through a divorce process and they decide on a pension share, what documentation do you need from them to make that transfer?
Yes, so we'll need the decree absolute, we'll need the consent order, and we'll need the pension sharing order or the annex. So that outlines exactly how the pension should be split. And of course, we need those documents certified. So at PensionBee, we only do pension splitting. And so we will both split existing pensions when someone is going through a divorce and we're able to send that money to another provider, or we will be the receiving provider where, for example, the partner who is splitting the pension, their scheme won't allow a new member to join. Maybe it's a workplace scheme. And so we would be the recipient of that pension. And so, in both cases, we're going to need all of that paperwork certified. So, and we need to be highlighted as the provider that's responsible for transferring the split pension. Where it does get tricky, as I said, is where you've got multiple pensions being split with multiple providers. And that can be really overwhelming. And also it can be, obviously we're very quick at responding, but I think, when you're dealing with a lot of providers, it can take time really to get answers that you need from all the different providers. So the process can be quite overwhelming for people.
And it strikes me that if you're having a pension share and money is coming into another pot, that would be a good time to seek some help and guidance from PensionBee, because you could end up with lots of small pensions rather than one pot that you're managing.
Well, yeah, so our unique offering is that we put them all into one pot. And so if you were the recipient of a portion of 4 different pots, we could bring them all together into one pot at PensionBee. So we'd be able to assist with that.
And presumably if people have existing pensions in addition to the pension share, that would also be an option to consolidate all the pensions into one place.
You can definitely bring them all together in one place, yes. And we see that quite regularly.
And is there an advantage then to having one pension pot, or are people better to spread the risk into different pots?
Most modern pensions are going to be globally diversified, across all industries, all sectors around the world. So, generally most modern pensions are going to be invested in the S&P 500, the US market. They're going to be invested in the FTSE. They're going to be invested in all the same type of stocks. Just the asset mix will be slightly different. So really they're already diversified and you're already sort of spreading your risk across all of those geographies and industries and sectors as well. And so no, that's not really what people, the problem we have is that, if you have 11 small pots, each of those pots comes with 11 sets of paperwork, 11 logins.
That's enough to send anybody over the edge, isn't it? 11 logins.
If you've got a lot of free time at the weekends where you want to set up an Excel sheet and you want to start doing projections for all these little pots are going to be worth, it's impossible to work out what you have and whether that's going to be enough in retirement. So most people consolidate to get a sense of control and to be able to understand that they need to be putting away a certain amount each month in order to have the income that they deserve and want once they reach retirement age.
Okay. So Anna, we said there are 3 basic options. There's leaving things as they are. There's splitting the pension that we've just discussed. What's the third option?
A typical third option is something called cash offsetting. Now that's where one spouse will keep their more valuable pension plan or plans in exchange for taking less of other available assets. So whether that's property or savings or investments, or they may make a cash payment to their spouse instead of sharing their pension by way of a pension sharing order. Now historically, this has been very, very popular option. And a typical scenario that you used to see is husband keeping his pension, wife retaining the family home. But it's definitely a scenario to be wary of, or at least make sure you're fully informed about before you go down that route. Pensions, we talked about, they're not comparable to property and savings. They're a very different type of asset, sort of a mixture of both capital and income generating, and they are complex. So although it might seem attractive, it can have real financial disadvantages because people don't really know the true value of the pension. So if it is something that you're contemplating, then do think about whether you need the help of a pension expert to advise on what a suitable cash offset amount would be. And that's particularly the case if it's a defined benefit pension.
Right. So what you're saying here is just comparing a CETV with the value of a property isn't always going to be a very accurate way of deciding whether or not the offset you're proposing is fair. Is that fair enough?
That's right.
And so what sort of help can you get with that? So you mentioned a pensions expert. Is this about getting an actuarial report, for example?
Yes. So it's worth giving thought to whether you want to seek some advice from a pensions expert when making decisions. And if you're thinking about cash offsetting, it can certainly be worthwhile doing that.
Okay. And in an actuarial report, an actuary will be able to calculate what the equivalent value of a property versus a pension is specific to that pension. So it's not just that there's a standard calculation. You can discount, can't you? There is a method of discounting cash by a certain percentage to compare. But I think what you're saying is there is a much more accurate way if you get an actuarial report.
That's it. You could take a stab at applying a discount, like a cash amount, as opposed to the value of the pension benefits, which you could have otherwise pursued. But it's always going to be very rough and ready. And if that's what you want to do, that's okay. But just understand that it is a rough and ready figure. If you really want to understand that you are getting a fair amount, the right amount, then it is worthwhile getting the help of a pension expert.
And tell me a little bit about the different types of pension experts. So, Claire, do you provide actuarial reports, or is this a specific other type of service?
Yeah, we don't offer any advice at all, and we wouldn't signpost either. I mean, normally what we do with customers, if they need the first port of call for us, we'd send them to Money Helper, which is an impartial free government guidance service. And so it's the former pensions advisory service. And so they have lots of trained advisors who are experts in pensions who can, as a first port of call, give you completely free and impartial guidance. And they would then also be able to signpost you potentially to someone who has more expertise. As well, for customers over 50, there's the Pension Wise, which is another free one-to-one personal appointment with a government service to kind of talk through your options. So that would be our first port of call. But then, of course, if people are in severe distress or something, it would be Citizens Advice, or it would be one of those services, and they would probably pass you on to someone else that could give you more expertise.
So, Anna, are there any other ways of dealing with pensions in divorce? We've talked about offsetting, we've talked about pension sharing, we've talked about leaving it as is in terms of everybody taking their own pensions. Is there anything else that we've missed in terms of the way pensions can be treated?
There is another type of order that the court can make called a pension attachment order. And that's where a pension provider can be required by the court to pay a percentage of somebody's pension income or the lump sum or death benefits to their ex-spouse. But that can only kick in once the pension's actually in payment. So it may or may not be suitable for people. Pension attachment orders aren't used often. Pension sharing orders seem to be much more popular, and that's because pension attachment orders do carry risks. And they can keep former spouses financially tied together, which has obvious drawbacks. Unlike the pension sharing order, where you will have your completely separate pension pots after the divorce.
Yeah, that's an important point, isn't it, in terms of feeling like you've got that separation and that independence from somebody. We should say a pension sharing order splits the pension at the point you divorce, not at the point it's paid, because I think that's often confused, isn't it? And that means you are totally financially separate from the point of the divorce, which is obviously a benefit for people. Claire, what happens if people have got overseas pensions? Can you still help them?
So we wouldn't be able to help with overseas pensions. We can only help with customers who are splitting their pensions in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, because of course Scotland also has different rules. Overseas pensions, you would need to get specialist support on an overseas pension because there are a lot of very complex tax rules around transferring pensions internationally. So you definitely need a pensions expert on that.
And Anna, we do see a lot of time, don't we, at Amicable, people have got overseas pensions. What are the problems with overseas pensions?
So yes, overseas pensions, first of all, they need to be valued as part of the disclosure process, which is difficult in itself because there's no conventional way of valuing an overseas pension, which is equivalent to our CEV process here. But nevertheless, the first port of call is to ask the overseas pension provider to provide information about the value and also the rules of the scheme as well, because they can be vastly different to our pensions. For example, some overseas pensions can be liquidated, cashed in easily, unlike our UK-based ones. But absolutely, I agree with Claire. This is a real area where you need expert help, if that's an option that you're looking for.
So even getting the value of an overseas pension in order to do your disclosure and to look at, how you might want to split things, even that's going to be a little bit trickier. So you do need some expert help.
Yes.
And then, of course, there are a number of complexities around moving pensions internationally as well that you'd have to factor into that.
So it sounds like it might be an offsetting type arrangement if you've got international pensions. Anna, does the English and Welsh court have jurisdiction to be able to make a pension sharing order, even if it's possible with an overseas pension?
A few years ago, it was thought that they may do, but we've had a case law in the recent years that says no, the English and Welsh court cannot make a pension sharing order for an overseas pension. There have been situations where this has been dealt with US pensions where the couple gave undertakings to the English court that they would apply in the relevant US state for a pension sharing order in that state. Now, I think that's quite unique to these particular pensions and the US. That's not something widespread, but there are options out there, and that's why it is important to get some advice to see what is possible.
So assuming then that we've done a successful pension sharing order, Claire, you mentioned before some of the things that somebody might get asked. So let's assume that I've done a pension sharing order and I'm going to set up a new pension. What sort of decisions am I going to have to make? What are you going to ask me about that I need to have thought through?
If you can't become a member of the scheme that your partner's in, you're going to have to find a new provider. So you need to search online and find providers who set up new pensions. The market is highly complex and lots of providers will have sort of lots of paperwork involved in setting up new pensions, which is the last thing you probably want to be dealing with when you're going through a divorce. So you need to find a provider that will allow you to set up a new pension. You need to decide the type of plan you want to go into. So, as I said, some of these providers will offer you 3,000 options that can be very overwhelming. You need to decide how much you want to pay in fees, whether you want to use an advisor, how you want the money invested, whether you have any ethical or moral concerns that you want to be reflected in those investments. And you have to make a number of kind of big decisions about what you want your pension to look like. Obviously, at PensionBee, we allow customers to set up a pension online in less than 5 minutes with no paperwork. So we are a very popular destination for new customers who wish to sort of put their portion of the pension with a new provider. And of course, we have a very limited fund range. We just have 7 plans, and all of which are sort of commonly used in the workplace. So they're all, diversified and very suitable for normal pension savers. So and we don't charge either for bringing those pensions across. So we are commonly sort of used as a provider of choice, but you can choose any provider in the market that accepts new pensions, really. But it is, as I said, a complex market. So there's a lot of thinking and Google searching you kind of need to do before that.
Okay. And Anna, the timing of this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because Claire mentioned there that they don't charge fees, but lots of providers will charge fees. And we know that fees are charged for splitting the pension as well. So a couple will have to make decisions about how those fees are going to be met, aren't they? So it sounds like from a timing perspective, people need to organise potentially where they're going to be putting their pension, although you don't have to when you do the divorce. If you can, then you can discuss how the setup fees are going to be paid as well as the distribution fees, and that might feel fairer to people as well.
Absolutely. So there can be fees payable to the pension provider where the pension debit is being taken from, and you need to talk to your provider to find out what those fees are. Some providers won't charge anything, others it's £2,000. So that's an interesting, it's a necessary point, and it's one of the questions that's asked on the pension sharing annex. You need to have reached a decision regarding that.
But it's interesting, on the pension sharing annex, only the distribution of the pension fees are asked about, not the setup fees, and sometimes that can be a bit of a nasty shock for people when they're setting up a pension to realise they've actually got to pay sometimes several £1,000s to set up a pension. Claire, do you know what the typical costs are?
I mean, some providers will have minimums. So they will have a minimum amount that you need to have invested in your pension in order for you to become a customer, or you'll need to have minimum monthly payments going into that pension. And of course, we have no minimums. So, even if your portion was very, very small, that would be absolutely fine. We do actually, there is a small charge for customers who wish to split their pension. That's £300, but that's the only charge we have associated with it.
And sometimes fees are as a percentage, aren't they, rather than a flat fee? So you might be charged 1 or 2 or 3 or up to 5% of your pension pot when you come to place a pension with a new provider.
So the fees are an interesting topic of conversation. So you'll normally have sort of a platform fee or a provider fee, and that's the cost of using or being with that provider. And then there'll be a separate fund fee, which is the cost of the fund you've chosen. So you'll have both of those fees, and then maybe also other additional fees. So sort of ploughing through all the small print on those fees can be quite an undertaking, and making sure you fully understand all those fees. At PensionBee, we just have one fee, and it's one all-in fee, and that's all you'll pay. So we've sort of taken a different approach to the rest of the industry on that.
And we've been talking about, obviously, couples who are separating and divorcing, but we should just clarify as well, Anna, if you're a cohabiting couple, is pension sharing open to you as an option, or do you have to be married to have a pension share?
You have to be married. So cohabiting couples just don't have the same rights available to them under English and Welsh law as married couples do. And that's regardless of the length of the relationship. This common law marriage is certainly a myth. So they're not able to make the same claims on their ex-partner's pension assets when their relationship breaks down.
And what about if you've missed the boat with this? If you've done a consent order and you haven't claimed against a pension, can you go back later and claim?
If there has been no consent order?
If there has been a consent order, so first of all, if there has, so if you've done a consent order but you've missed the pension, can you go back and claim in later years?
Well, it depends on how it's been drafted. Usually a consent order will make some financial provision in there. And then there will be what's called a clean break clause at the end, which will say that all your other claims have been dismissed. So typically there will have been a dismissal of pension-based claims as well in your consent order. But obviously you need to check.
And then if a couple has already separated or divorced, but they haven't done the financial order and they're thinking about that now, can a spouse claim against a pension, even if the couple have remarried?
Yeah, so if there's been no consent order and they've remarried, you can still make a pension claim, yeah. And that's why it's so important to do your consent order when you do your divorce.
Yeah, because otherwise you've got an open claim hanging over your head, haven't you? And in 20 years' time or whenever, that could be a very valuable asset that you haven't protected.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can see. Great. Well, look, guys, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you both. Thank you so much for your time and your energy around this subject. It's always such a tricky one, pensions, and always one that I think sometimes can get overlooked. So I'm very grateful to you both for bringing a sort of spotlight to pensions and just how important they are. So Claire, where can people find out more about you and PensionBee?
So you can find out more about us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Our handle is @PensionBee.
And Anna, what about you?
In terms of Amicable, website is amicable.io.
Brilliant. Look, it's been a pleasure talking to you both. Thank you very much. Of course, you can find out more about me on Twitter. I'm @Kate_Daly. And you can hear about the new podcast episodes by following @divorce_podcast. And you can also subscribe to this podcast by following thedivorcepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much, both of you, for your time today.